All right. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much
Hi,
for
how are you?
joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today's date is April 27th, 2013, and we're here to discuss the Boston bombings. Just before we get started, I just wanted to go over two quick things. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, I'll be uploading this video to the internet to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with you?
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about our discussion staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone. Um, are you fine with that ground rule as well?
I'll do my best. Yes, of course.
All right, great. So then let's get our conversation started. Just for any of our people who are in the audience right now, as well as those who will watch this video in the future, would you mind just giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this topic?
Yeah, well, this may not be that relevant, but I'm a biological anthropologist and I'm a science blogger at scienceblogs.com. I have relatively strong feelings about this because, for the same reason everyone else does. I mean, no one lacks strong feelings about this event. I did live in Boston for about 17 years, and then I moved to the Twin Cities and have lived here almost about the same amount of time. And uh, one of the things that concerns me and that I'm most interested in, and this is a longer term rather than a shorter term thing, is how we reacted as a country and as a society to 9/11. And I think we did things in response to 9/11 that we can see may have learned from. And this may be a time to remember those things and reflect on those things now as things are happening. Um, but really, I don't think that I have more of a sense of attachment to this issue than most other people, who be listening or watching do as well. I've written a couple of blog posts about it, which I linked on the chat screen.
Okay, great. Great. So what I was going to ask is, I mean, immediately when the bombing happened, would you mind just sort of taking us through what on your end you were sort of going through and what sort of feelings you were having with relation to the actual event taking place?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I remember finding out about it right after it happened. It was tweeted, I think, and uh, obviously the first thing you think about when you hear something like that is what is actually happening. Going back to 9/11. I heard about the 9/11 attacks while I was lecturing. I was teaching intro archaeology, and my teaching assistant came over, whispered in my ear, "A plane has hit the World Trade Center." And my first thought was, "Damn Reagan! He laid off all those. He got rid of the unionized air traffic controllers. Some kind of mistake has been made." And then she came over again and said, "Another plane has hit the World Trade Center." And it took me a long time to think that this was actually a terrorist attack. In the case of the Boston bombings, I heard two explosions, and we had an explosion here in the Twin Cities just a few weeks. But very quickly after hearing it, I saw the newsreel that showed what looked very much like obviously intentionally set explosions on the street. Um, and my first thought was, one of the first things we think about is, who would do something like this? That's the very first. That's probably a major point of discussion. What do we make assumptions about? Who do we get mad at? Who do we look for? What kind of reaction do we have? Depends upon who did it.
Right.
And my first reaction then was this. I really thought the most likely thing was that it was a very distinct possibility. This was just some kids who knew how to make a bomb that were being complete jerks. And I really was thinking, this is not something that makes sense as a terrorist attack. It doesn't make sense as an attack by an American homegrown terrorist, because this is not a government facility. It doesn't make sense as a foreign terrorist attack. I didn't think at the time, although it turned out that marathons are routinely bombed elsewhere in the world. It turns out, races. Well, not routinely, but it has happened many times before. And I really thought the idea of it being just a couple of kids who were psychopathic or sociopathic and happened to know how to make a bomb that were out of control. It turns out that may in fact be correct in some way. That may in fact be what we saw. But that was my first reaction. And then, of course, as a blogger and somebody who's on the internet, you have to be a little bit self-conscious about this. I mean, do you, as a blogger, live blog the news? because all you're really doing is repeating stuff that the news is coming up with every few seconds. And um, I decided to not do that. I decided to go on my Facebook account, put up a post there, and just note the things the news is saying, because I think it's very interesting to look at news reports in and of itself. There's uh, a great example of this happened here in the Twin Cities a few years ago when there's a series of mines that were dug by 3M and in the banks of the Mississippi. And every few years, some kids go in these mines and die somehow. They somehow suffocate or they burn themselves up, whatever. In this case, the kids have created a fire and a bunch of kids died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Over the next several hours, there was a constant live stream of news going on. And there were news reporters on the tops of the bluffs and news reporters on the bottom of the bluffs, and news reporters in the middle of the bluffs. And some could see bodies taken out, some could see ambulances going away, and some could see other aspects of the rescue operation, recovery operation. And every time a kid's body was taken out, it was reported 3 different times as a different individual body being removed. So by the end of the day, there were something like 28 dead kids in this cave. It turned out that it was only about 5. And it's just a classic example of the news agencies themselves being unable to properly report and observe and parse what was happening. So that, to me, was something to do. That was something valid and legitimate to do that wasn't obnoxious, wasn't second-guessing the police, wasn't imposing my ideas or thinking on what was occurring, just observing what was being said and sort of recording it so you could look back later. So that's how I decided to occupy my time. Of course, people have strong opinions about whether you should do certain things until the circumstance changes and they do the same thing themselves. And I think a lot of people who are news junkies just sort of glued themselves to TVs, and people who aren't news junkies did the same thing. In my case, our son was homesick for a lot of this. I was taking care of a toddler. I did not have the TV. I did not want to see him to be seeing these images. So I was doing all this on the internet. But everybody becomes a news junkie when something like this happens. Of course, that's what I was doing as well. Just watching.
Right. Great. So, I mean, what was your impression? Obviously, there's a ton of police force that were involved, and military came in, National Guard. I mean, what was your impression of how, the of how it was all handled? 4 days after being able to capture these kids. I mean, did you think it was a way overblown amount of personnel to be coming into Boston to try and find this one individual, or do you think it was the right move to bring in as much people, as much force as they did to get this contained?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, one of the problems we have right now in this discussion, and just 1 week after the event kind of finished unfolding, is, and this is again a post 911 thing. Now, I might be crazy, but I noticed after 911 a number of changes happened in our society. I noticed that when it used to be that when you called 911 because you observed something that the police should know about, the police would come along, and they would ask you what was going on. They'd say thanks. They'd go deal with the issue. After 911, when you call 911, when the police show up, they shake you down. They ask you for your ID. They want to know who you are, what you're doing. This happened to me recently when a bizarre thing I won't explain because it would take too long. It's not interesting enough happened in our neighborhood. I called 911. I was in the backyard barbecuing, and suddenly I have 4 or 5 cops on me asking me for my identification, which I refused to do, and I sent them away, and they had to go with because I was standing in my backyard. I think that, and at the same time, if you say something if you say something positive about first responders right now, especially after so many died in 911, about a fact that an MIT cop was killed, another Boston cop was critically wounded, and at the same time down in West Texas, you have a dozen first responders dying when they go to this explosion site. They deserve our respect, deserve our thanks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you say anything like that, that's good. If you say anything critical, like, gee, maybe they should have done something different, or maybe they shouldn't show up and ask for your ID in your backyard when you're barbecuing, some people get mad at you. I think there's a certain phenomenon here that happens, which I call first responder worship, which is basically where it doesn't matter if you're a cop or a fireman, you can't do wrong. And we live in a society, when we live in a society in which the police can't be criticized, that is a very, very serious issue. I'm not one of these people who goes around fearing that the government is going to repress us and that we must constantly be on guard. But that is an example of what I think we mostly don't want to have. So having said that, your question is almost unanswerable because it's only one instance. If we had a bombing like this every few months and we could look at 20 cases over 5 years, and we could say, well, when they did it this way, this worked, and when they did it that way, we had these negative effects. Then we can start to understand it. But at the same time, we want every cop in the world to show up to catch the guy who's got bombs on him and is shooting people randomly. At the same time, we want them all to completely go away when it's over, and to not live in a society where when you glance around at any given moment, among all the different people you see, among all the different vehicles you see, there's a cop car everywhere you go. We don't want that. So, well, also we can ask. I think people should be asking the question. The police should be asking the questions. How did the first cop get killed? What went wrong? How did they do a dragnet over such a large area and miss the guy? And how is it that the FBI were in touch with one of the bombers a couple years ago and let that slide by? Now, I'm sure that you can't just look at those instances individually and say they did it wrong. As far as we know, the FBI had questioned 10,000 people. 301 of them were actual terrorists. 300 of them were stopped, and one of them slipped through the cracks. That would be quite successful. We can't look at those events not in context, but I think it's worthwhile looking at them. I think if I lived in the area, I should mention that every single one of these events that happened in a neighborhood I lived in. The guy was found in the boat down the street from a house I house sat for a summer. So I had a good visual image of what was going on there, and I would say that if I lived in that neighborhood and there had been shooting and a running gun battle and people were out doing this, when we knew this was going on, I would not have any problem with it being a very large number of police and National Guard closing down a neighborhood and looking through everything for that period of time.
You wouldn't. You would be fine with it.
I would not.
Right.
I would be fine with it as long as our society could handle not reacting to that by saying, let's have more of that, please, even when we don't need it. If our society could react to that if the police, like I said, at the end of the day, went away and we didn't see them again, except for at traffic stops and that kind of thing. After that, I think that if it results in ramping up police presence and police oppression, that's a bad thing. But if it's just you show up, you catch the guy, and you go home, that's a good thing.
Right. So, what's your impression of the people that are out there right now kind of going into the whole conspiracy theory on this Boston bombing? Have you been on top of that, and would you mind talking about that?
Well, a little bit. I'm not sure where this started. I mean, conspiracy theorizing started a long time ago. But I think it's become a trope. It's become a pattern now. Because of the last few rounds of it occurring, it was really sharpened with Obama being elected, because a lot of people just could not handle the idea of Obama being elected. And so he couldn't really be a citizen, or he couldn't really have been actually elected. We saw that happen. Interestingly, we saw very little of that during the Bush administration, but we saw it during Clinton also. There were major conspiracies about what the Clinton administration was doing. People have also forgotten about that now. But it's sort of more of a right-wing thing, that not entirely, but it's more of a right-wing thing. And I think that when Sandy Hook happened, and people came out very quickly with the theory that this was something that President Obama arranged to happen, the murder of 20 first graders and their teachers, that was a false flag theory that, to me, was the moment at which people coming forward with false flag theories, 100%, all of them lost all of their credibility forever and could never be taken seriously again. Not that they ever could be taken seriously necessarily. If people have theories about how the government is doing something, or some major corporations are doing something suspicious and they have evidence, these things should be talked about. These things may in fact happen. Governments and big corporations can certainly do things like this. But if your mindset involves taking everything that happens ever and identifying it as somebody that you are somehow politically opposed to having arranged it and faked it every single time, then you're in a special group of people. It used to be, in the old days, something like 11% of the American population believed that they had seen UFOs and many of whom had been abducted by aliens. And about 1 or 2% of the population believed that they were aliens. And that works out about right. That many people being aliens would abduct about that many people. And I think that those people, frankly, and I don't want to sound like I'm an ableist, because is that what the point I'm trying to make here? That I'm being insensitive because I'm frankly feeling a little bit insensitive. These people are crazy. They're nutbags. And I don't mean to say bad things about individuals here, but really, the President of the United States organizing the murder of 21st graders, and the government organizing setting off 2 bombs on a street in Boston are really, really negative, destructive, and crazy ideas. It should be called out as such. And the only thing that's notable and interesting about this particular event is the rapidity with which it developed. It developed instantly. It developed to look exactly like all the other ideas that have come up recently, and that's simply because it's the 3rd or 4th time it's happened in recent months, in the recent year or so. My thinking is, if you find yourself thinking that this might be true, you have to step back and think about how you think about things generally. And I actually think that they're very, very negative and destructive and obnoxious ideas. If there is some evidence, I might be interested in hearing it, but there isn't
any. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's something that has been popping up, over the past few days that I've been seeing. You go on Twitter and you type in Boston, and the first thing that comes up is Boston cover up, and you see a ton of people tweeting about that. And so I just thought it'd be interesting. It'd be great to maybe have someone here. We'll have to save that for next time. We'll get someone over here that we can have you engage with that is believing that, and hear both sides of the story, because that's what we're all about here at Vonvo. So what's your take?
Well, I have to interrupt you there, though. There isn't 2 sides of this story. One thing you have to be very careful when you're developing a social media site like this, or a news-related or discussion commentary-related site like this, is falling into the trap that, there are people who are going to come along and tell you that 1 + 1 = 3. And the fact that they say that does not mean that 1 + 1 = 2.5. It still equals 2. Mm-hmm. Okay? There's not both sides to the story. There's a range of opinions and a range of information, and then there's some very, very, very outlandish, unsupported, crazy ideas. And there are probably just as many people who will tell you. Are you going to, if you have someone on here about conservation, if you have someone on this, I think you should have those people on. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but it's not because there's both sides of the story. It's more like because it's interesting to hear people say outlandish ideas, and you can give the appearance of openness, and maybe someone might even have some kind of an important idea that will come along. But if you had a show on conservation of wolves, I mean, people are interested in hunting wolves in Minnesota. Other people want to preserve them. We opened up the wolf hunting this year. It's a topic you could do. Would you have somebody who came on who said you must do X, Y, and Z with the wolves because otherwise it interferes with Bigfoot's ecology? Okay. Would you have a Bigfoot person on as a serious, a person who comes along and claims, I'm a zoologist and I'm sure Bigfoot is real, and the Bigfoot perspective has to be talked about when we talk about wolf conservation in Minnesota, and believe me, there are people who believe that is true. Would you give them the same exact level of access that you would give people who do legitimately debate whether there should be a wolf hunt or not? And if you do, that's fine. That could be your way of doing things. But it's not because there's 2 sides of the story. It's because you're willing to let completely crazy, insane people in under the tent.
Right.
And that's only my opinion. I know you may have a very different opinion. But the people who claim, the false flaggers are the same, are even worse. There's more evidence of Bigfoot than of these false flag operations.
Right. So what I was just going to say is, unfortunately, I'm not going to give. I mean, in the end, we're really about giving everyone a voice and allowing them to speak their minds, and then having others such as yourself be there to counter any points. In terms of my personal opinion, since it's my company, we host a ton of discussions on Vonvo, and we keep our personal opinions out of them, just because it wouldn't be proper to have the founders of the company giving our personal opinions. But we're all about individuals, passionate individuals across all different subjects, sharing their opinion. I wanted to ask you, what is your thoughts on what should happen to the young 18, 19-year-old individual that was found and that was caught? Give us your sense on what should be taking place with him, because there's a lot of discussion taking place about death penalty,
Hmm.
deported and stuff along those lines. So what would you like to see happen?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of things to say about this. One thing I remember, Michael Dukakis being asked a question when he was running for president, um, because he had let, as governor, he let someone out. His prison system let someone out who then went and did some really bad things. So the reporters asked him, "What would you do if some guy got out and raped your wife? How would you react?" And his answer was, "I would let the criminal justice system do its job, because that's why we have a criminal justice system. We're a civilized society." And that helped lose him the election, because people want to hear, "No, I'd want to go and beat the guy up. I'd take a knife to him." What he really probably should have said, which a lot of people in fictional accounts of that have said since then, is, "I'd want to kill him, but I let the criminal justice system, because we're a civilized country." My daughter has spent a fair amount of time, she's 17, in the Republic of Georgia. And she knows a lot of people who are from the region of Chechnya and Ossetia and so on. And she noted to me, she was actually in Boston just the other day, and she noted, I was telling her about what they were finding out. She was there during the manhunt, and she was strapped at the airport and so on. And we are talking about it, and she said, "Yeah, probably if I was in high school with this guy, we'd be best friends." Because they had this Caucasian connection, this connection to the Caucasus Mountains and to that region, and she tends to be friends with people who are from that area here, and so on. And I thought that was interesting to say, because actually that's probably true. And if they were, and he might have been a bit of a jerk on Twitter, she probably would have been straightening him out. And the fact that they're best friends, I like to think that this wouldn't have happened, because my daughter would have fixed it somehow. But when we have to treat, again, going back to 9/11, what we did wrong after 9/11, I think, was not treating those acts as criminal acts. The same with McVeigh and everything else. And these are criminal acts. They might be acts of terrorism also, but we have a criminal justice system. We have spent a lot of time and effort and suffering and money and thinking, writing the Constitution, all this case law since then, on developing a criminal justice system that has all kinds of flaws, but relatively speaking, it's a pretty good one if we overlook certain significant biases. And I think that when a major crime happens, it's not the time to say, "Oh, we don't have a criminal justice system. We'll just go and take the guy and draw and quarter him with the horses in town square." Or in the case of some people are calling for him to be treated as an enemy combatant. These two individuals were American citizens. They carried out serious crimes, and they should be addressed. These should be addressed in the criminal justice system, just like any other serious crime. I have mixed feelings about this security exception, where you don't give someone you don't Mirandize a suspect until after you've asked them a bunch of questions. It seems like something that hasn't actually been abused. It's only been used a few times. Yet it seems like something that could be very badly abused. And I think I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we have a rule that says this fundamental moment where we tell you about your rights that are related to several different amendments in the Bill of Rights. We're just going to forget that for a while. I think that's a very bad idea. So I don't agree with that. But yeah, I think they should be treated like any other criminals carried out any other kind of crime. And in their case, their crimes happen to include murdering a cop, shooting at a bunch of other cops, blowing up 170 people, of whom 3 died, and so on. And that's plenty. I don't think we need to try them as enemy combatants. I live in the 3rd district in Minnesota, so my congressional representative is not Michelle Bachmann, but I can see Michelle Bachmann's district by looking to my left out the window here. It's right across the street, and she came out to say that he should be an enemy combatant. And one thing I think people need to know about Boston is it's a very heterogeneous area. So you can live there's neighborhoods in Boston where you can live where every one of your neighbors was born in Boston, and their parents were born in Boston, and their parents were born in Boston all the way back to some major immigration or the Mayflower or whatever. But the areas where this all played out, Medford, Watertown, Somerville, Cambridge, I lived in a bunch of places there. I lived there for 17 years, but most of that was in school. I was overseas a lot, so I'd have to put stuff in storage and come back at a new apartment. So I lived in probably 10 different apartments during that time. And I never lived anywhere where I didn't have a landlord and or neighbors who were not born in the United States. It's an area of extreme diversity and a lot of recently implemented diversity. So people are just from everywhere. So the idea of a couple of high school kids in a Boston high school at Ringe and Latin High School in Cambridge, having not been born in the United States and still being basically Bostonians, that's absolutely normal. That's a part of the world where many of the people you know and encounter every day were born somewhere else, and they're still Americans like anybody else is. So the idea that I think that people from other parts of the country, especially the middle, like where I'm from, where I live now, the immigrants in the Twin Cities are from New York and Los Angeles. They're not from other countries so much. We have a few immigrant groups here, of course, but I think people have to realize that the idea that these guys were born in Chechnya and lived in a couple other countries for a while, it just makes them really typical American Bostonians.
Right. What I was going to ask next is like, what was your, how did you think the media reacted to all this in terms of covering the subject, and now a week later covering the subject, and now going forward, how they're going to, play off the whole, terrorism concept, homegrown terrorism, terrorism around the world. What's your sense on the media's impact, and perhaps how you think something like a Vonvo.com can maybe act as an alternative for maybe getting a little bit more objective perspective on these sorts of subjects?
Yeah. Okay. It's a good question. First of all, I think it's not going to be a lot of people are not going to agree with what I'm about to say. I'm not sure if I do either, but I think the media did a better job than I expected. They did a better job at being reasonably accurate and objective because they have gotten called on being so bad at covering things in the past when it comes to. I mean, the media completely played into the Oklahoma City bombing. The instant that happened, they were very openly talking about Middle Eastern terrorism. And the fact that they were so abysmally wrong, I think they learned a lesson. So I think when it comes to making assumptions and jumping to conclusions, they've been doing about the big picture. They've been a little bit more self-referential, and they've been doing a better job than they would have done 10 or 20 years ago. At the same time, getting the facts straight, they have not. I don't think they've improved much at all in that area. This story I told about the tragedy in St. Paul, where in Minneapolis, where the kids died in the mines. That kind of reporting where things that people say are quickly turned into facts, and then the facts, a single fact can be represented as many slightly different facts, and then they become distinctly different facts, and then they're reported as like 10 things happened. So the number of bombs that were found, the number of bombs that were blown up by the police went up to quite a large number at one point. I think there were 6 or 7 unexploded devices that were in the hands of the FBI at one point. And that's probably, and that never happened. So that kind of inability to report things hasn't really been addressed. I don't think the press has fixed that at all. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have Twitter. Now, Twitter is the most dynamic, instantaneous, responsive discussion medium in social media, I think, because more people are on it than anything else practically, and it's just a large volume. And I think that we learned something really important about Twitter when this event happened, and that is the dream of social networking becoming a place where news really flows and information really is available, and we really learn things, was completely and utterly obliterated by Twitter, by what Twitter did, what happened on Twitter. I was following Twitter, as I said. I didn't have the TV on, and the only Twitter sources that were useful were my friend Tom, who was at MIT when that cop was shot. So he was observing things, and he didn't have much. He was a journalist, so he was being extremely careful what he said. And the Boston Police Department and the City of Boston's Twitter feeds, and even they messed up. The Boston Police said, we're no longer looking for a certain car. And a moment later, the city retweeted, we're looking for this car, because they misinterpreted the tweet. The one tweet away from the police department by the official city Twitter account. And then, but they said the car wrong. They said the name of the kind of car wrong. So, or actually, I think they said it right. So the the police said, no, we didn't mean that kind of car. We meant this kind of car that we're not looking for. And then the Boston said, sorry, that's right. You guys were looking for this other car. So between the two, you would not have understood whether or not they were really looking for a car, what kind of car it was. But aside from that screw up, they were the only sources of information that were actually reliable and useful and important. Because I was trying to find from the internet what to tell my daughter, who was landing in an airplane the morning that they were doing the manhunt in Boston. I think it was Friday, right? And or Thursday, whatever that day that was, Friday. And like, here's what you need to do and not do. They're not going to let you out of the airport. Here's the T's running, the T's not running. And the only information I got that I could actually pass on to her was from those two sources. The rest of Twitter was utterly useless, out of control, and stupid. People making up stuff, people making up entire Twitter accounts. So the flexibility and dynamic nature and instantaneous nature of that part of the social networking showed itself to be, all those attributes turned out to be the reason it can't really ever work. It's just garbage. I was very disappointed, and I'm no longer interested in hearing from people saying how the world will be revolutionized by Twitter. On the other side, you have CNN, the mainstream networks, and they're asserting facts with authority that are wrong. And so you get less garbage, but it's still just as bad. And I frankly think, and I'm not a paid sponsor of Vonvo, but I think things like Vonvo and Google Hangouts and things like that might be a little bit better, because we're not tweeting here. We're stepping back and thinking a bit more about what we're saying. And if somebody doesn't like what we're saying right now, although they haven't done it yet, they can just jump in, right?
Right.
And you got two other spaces on here, and they can start telling us that we're wrong. So this is a little bit like Twitter in that we can be dynamic, but it's also a bit more like mainstream news in that we can be a bit more thoughtful and think about what we're doing, and a bit more like all-day news instead of just 5 o'clock news or 6 o'clock news, because there's no time limit on when these things run. So I think, done right. Have you ever heard of logging heads?
Yes, we have actually, yep.
Okay, logging heads is a model for what you're doing a little bit. Not in the sense that it's just getting people talking.
Correct.
And they got into big trouble because they were using a lot of science. They were doing a lot of science discussions.
Yes.
I did one with David Dobbs on his book on called Brief Madness, and in the process, they ended up getting a creationist on, who gave the creationist perspective on evolution, and a lot of people, major journalist type people, like I guess I should probably mention names because I might get them wrong, but big time online journalists and mainstream journalists who had previously done blogging heads all walked away. They said mean things and walked away. The blogging heads got a very bad reputation, and they did that because they had a mainstream central core idea of let's talk about science, and then they brought in complete pseudoscientists a couple of times. And their idea was like what you were saying before: we want everybody to have a say. But they didn't give everyone a say. They mainly did mainstream science for months, and then they let in some people who were not. So I recommend to you, as you're starting out here, get the Bigfoot guy on now. Get the people that I would object to early in the process on your show, so that you get a reputation for being relatively open, rather than having a reputation for having a certain focus and then ruining that later and people coming back and getting mad at you. Because even though you're not mainstream media and you're not Twitter, you're going to be either ignored or not by mainstream media, and you're going to be either chastised or revered by Twitter. And those are going to help define what you do, in a sense.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for the suggestion. We can definitely talk further about any other suggestions or comments you have about the platform, because, we are growing. But, just for our viewers that are in the audience right now, just to go back on subject for Boston, but I definitely appreciate your insight. It's funny you bring up that blogging talk, blogging heads, because we did know about that. But what I was going to say next is, do you have any, after since this has taken place, and I mean a lot of their family members have said, like, they basically got influenced at a local mosque near their homes, and so this idea of homegrown terrorism. I mean, do you think that this is bringing to the forefront that concept more of a more impactful concern that's affecting like the country right now? or that we should really probably take more on notice that as opposed to all the stuff going on abroad? Like, can that argument be made?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there again we have really fundamental structural problems in how the conversation works about this. Um, I got in big trouble a couple of years ago when I said that I did not think they should build the community center / mosque near the World Trade Center. And a lot of people got very mad at me for saying that. And the reason I said that is because I don't think they should build another church, temple, mosque, or any religious site that has a tax exemption on their land anywhere in Manhattan. Again, because I think that churches, I recently heard the number something like 17 billion a year, or maybe it was 70 billion, some really large number of dollars a year would be added to the national income if churches did not have tax exempt status. And a place like Manhattan, which has problems, real serious problems, social problems and poverty problems, should not be giving away access to land to anybody. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with 9/11, the attacks on 9/11, my feelings about religion. I'm an atheist. Or Islam in relation to politics. It's just that you shouldn't give any more land to churches, and that's equivalent with what that was. But this conversation about this was single dimensional. It is a bad thing to oppose the community center because it means that you're blaming the entire Muslim world for 9/11. And from that perspective, I fully support the community center and the mosque being built near 9/11. I just want them to pay land taxes, and I want everyone else to pay land taxes. That's just a tiny little issue. This is obviously much more complicated. Do we, the natural reaction? I mean, businesses after 9/11, businesses that were run by slightly brownish people from somewhere vaguely near the Middle East closed in the Twin Cities. Okay, Turkish and Greek restaurants went out of business, and because people were mad about 9/11, we have this is a huge problem. And so right now, a lot of people are looking at any mosque, anything Islamic, anything Muslim, and saying, yeah, this is our next source. This is the next source of terrorism. People are saying we need the mainstream Muslim community to condemn the fundamentalist Muslim groups, very verbally and very vocally. But when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City federal office building, we did not hear people demanding, well, some of us were, but we did not hear people demanding that everybody in the pulpit in every Christian church around the country condemn fundamentalist Christian groups. Or when abortion clinics have been blown up, when Rudolph blew up abortion clinics and attacked the Olympics, people were not asking for that of Christians. So there's strong imbalances in our society about what people of one religious persuasion get mad at in relation to some other religious persuasion, and what we accept as being, two or three religious ideas might be equivalent to the person holding them, but be really different to other people. For example, the prescription against making images in Islam. It's only some people who are Islamic, and by the way, it's also a Jewish thing in some Jewish groups. You can't make images. So teachers deal with this on a day-to-day basis, in places where there's Islamic people. Here's your biology exam. Draw a picture of a cell. I'm sorry, I can't draw a picture of a cell. I'm a Muslim. Okay. That's not the same thing as let's go blow up some guy in the Netherlands because he drew a cartoon. It's a completely different concept, but it's the same exact religious thing to begin with. So it's obviously not the religious beliefs or the religions themselves. It's what people do with them that are important, and that's what we should be talking about. That's what the conversation should be about. And I don't think that our public conversation in America is even close to sophisticated enough to talk about that. Most people either want to just be nice to everybody or be mean to everybody in the same way. And the idea of there being different Muslim groups that have very different feelings and very different ways in which things are done isn't something that we can easily accept. It's almost too complicated for us to handle. So I think we have to develop ways of having this conversation.
Right. So we might have a speaker joining us. Hey, Kamal, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Just there's a bit of an echo coming on your end. Do you have headphones by any chance?
Okay, just give me a second. Let me check it out. What's wrong?
Okay, great. So Greg, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I mean, so what in the end would you like to see sort of take place? I mean, because you bring up some some interesting points. But you know, my question would be is like, what exactly do you think should take place in terms of preventing any homegrown terrorism taking place and um, ultimately events like this not happening again? What should go on? And Kamal, do you have headphones by any chance, Kamal? Otherwise, I mean, I could still hear you, but if you have headphones, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me get the headphone over there.
Okay, yeah, that'll remove the echo if you have headphones. All right, so go ahead, Greg, and then we'll let Kamal come and chime in and answer anything you're discussing.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this event in Boston is best described as homegrown terrorism. I still think it's a couple of kids who are sociopathic or something who knew how to do some bad stuff and got away with doing some bad stuff and are very, very bad criminals. They could have been influenced by anything. They could have been influenced by video games, by something their mother did when they were 6. I mean, we could post hoc blame any one of the usual sources for bad behavior besides the individual themselves as contributing factors. And the fact that there, in this case, happened to be an Islamic connection is very pertinent to their behavior, but it isn't necessarily pertinent to our society and what we have to sort of things we have to worry about.
Right.
I think we need to know more about what happened, and in that regard, and it may be very different than. I don't think we know enough to be sure, but I really think that you couldn't have done what they did without being people that were going to do something just anyway.
Right.
In other words, if they weren't Muslims, they would have been doing something else, probably bad, and it wasn't because they were religious or Muslims. I don't regard this as a systematic attack by a group of Islamic fundamentalists from somewhere in the world on America. I regard this as two people who did something really bad, and they reached out for reasons to do what they needed to do, what they wanted to do.
Right.
So far, that's my null hypothesis right now.
Right. Kamal, did you hear what Greg had to say? Do you agree or disagree with what Greg's bringing up?
I just joined the last part over there. I don't know what's the startup for this. Can you hear me now better, or
Yeah.
it's still an echo?
Yeah, hear you great.
Okay, that's great. Gray, I didn't get it at the last point, whether you are talking about the attack is from the Muslim aggression over there or something like that. But over here from Pakistan, what we think that a blast in any part of the world killing humanity, it's not part of their religion. Neither Islam, neither any religion give us humiliate any kind of humanity over there or do any kind of harsh for any humanity, either it's Christian, Hindu, or anyone. Everyone has their own right. So we as a Muslim condemn these attacks, and we don't. We are in part of that scenario here in Pakistan as well. We are facing the same DOS attacks every day in every part of the city, either in Karachi, Islamabad, Lahore, Peshawar, you name it. We are giving the most of the human lives over here in Pakistan to make sure that the world is a safe haven for next generation over there.
Yeah, in the time between the time of the Boston bombs and the time that the suspects were caught, there was at least one major bombing in which 30 or so people died in Pakistan, which we have to remember. And those were people, just like the people in Boston that were killed, there were also people that were killed in a bombing. And I think that and it was important to remember that there are a very, very large number of people in this world who are Muslim, and there's a very large number of people who are Christian. As an atheist, I think they're all wrong about being religious, but this has nothing to do with the number of people that carry out these acts. These people who carry out acts who are in organized groups that carry out repeated acts of terrorism are doing something. They're doing their own thing for their own reasons, and they're using religion or whatever else as part of their justification, but it's not what people who otherwise are parts of those religions do. But again, I'm not convinced that these guys in Boston were even doing that. I think they might have even been less connected, or connected in a self-serving way that really isn't part of an organized group.
These kind of acts can be an individual acts, but if you say that this is a part of any kind of religion teaching, no, this is not a religious thought over there. Every religion respect humanity. Every religion respect the world or the lives of any individual person over there. Either whatever their religion is, whatever their thoughts are, they are free to live their own life. They are free to just whatever religion they wanted to go. They are free to live wherever they wanted to live. But we, as a influencer over here, wanted to condemn these kind of attacks and try to get the word out how we can stop these kind of attacks in different parts of the world. It's either in my country, either in your country, or either any third world country. We need to learn how to engage ourselves to get these things out of our way, and we can communicate positive thing in front of those powers who are trying to distract the religion over there in Christian or in Islam or anywhere else.
Do you have a response to that, Greg?
No, I basically agree completely. I think this is a large-scale social and economic problem. I think that it's a matter of getting. I don't think this is a religious war. I don't think it's helpful to treat it like that. It doesn't get anywhere. And I also just again emphasize this particular event in Boston may have even been more unconnected with international trends in terrorism than other acts that have happened. And in other words, here's the thing: people are trying to decide if this is international terrorism or if it's homegrown terrorism. Okay, and the criterion people seem to be using is it linked to Islam? If it's linked to Islam, then it's international, they say, and if it's not, then it's homegrown. But I have to tell you, Islam is homegrown. We have many people in this country who have all different beliefs, and these particular criminals may have linked themselves to a particular religion. They could have linked themselves to Christianity. I mean, there was a long period in Europe and England of that sort of terrorism. A lot more bombs went off in England in the name of Christian religion than have ever gone off in the United States or England in the name of Islamic religion. Keep that in mind. And it's not religions fighting, it's people who are using religions as an excuse. And if these guys end up linking themselves enough to Islam, it's still homegrown. It's still two Americans who carried out a heinous act and may have reasons of their own for doing it, and those reasons might include a religious connection that they claim, and it doesn't make it foreign, it doesn't make it an attack on the United States. It's two American citizens who did something very bad and need to be tried as criminals in our court system.
Kamal, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with this. This is not a religious war. This is absolutely not any religion is giving these kind of to any person over there. It's a religious aim to target any humanity over there. Definitely, there are people who are hiding themselves behind the religion and trying to create a bad image for any kind of religion. This is a part of religious war or something like that. I totally agree with that.
So I mean, Kamal, what do you think then ultimately was their motivation? These individuals. I mean, what can you kind of give us some insight into what you think was running through these younger guys' heads when they decided to do what they do? Would they do what they did?
Well, Max, as part of the cycle we are here in Pakistan, we are facing these kind of attacks on a daily basis. We learned how the people, the behavior of those attackers are. They are youth over here, actually in Pakistan as well. They have been brainwashed by some terrorist educational stuff where they can coming up from the root level, from a religious point of view. They are trying to teach religion over there and get the brainwash, and people are converting to different side of the religion. They thought that if they are going on this particular direction according to those terrorists, they are going on the right way where they can find their heaven over there, where there will be lots of reward for them or something like that. So it's again it's a negative education over there which is giving by us that we are not going to reject these kind of elements in our society. We have to reject these kind of elements in our society so that we can penetrate the actual image of any religion. There is lot to be done for positive image of the religion, the humanity. What is the humanity taught by any religion? Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, or any religion over there. We have to respect religion over there. It's not a religious fight. Absolutely, it's an individual act which is hid by the religion side.
Greg, do you want to comment on anything that Kamal just said? I mean,
No, unfortunately, I think we basically agree completely, so we can't have a debate or a fight over this.
yeah.
But I do think I noticed in the comments that are going along that the listeners have divided between those who want these guys tried as military combatants versus not, and that seems to be an opinion that is linked to the idea that they're not homegrown terrorists, even if they are homegrown terrorists. But those people are wrong, obviously. But versus, in other words, are they homegrown terrorists? Try them as criminals if it's an act of terrorism that's an attack in the United States. Try them as military, and I'll bet that set of opinions sorts out in other ways too, as to people's relevant or thinking about the relevance of religion or other aspects of their motivation. But again, I would maintain that these people weren't even regular terrorists. They are criminals, and they have used, in a way, they've joined the idea of terrorism into their own persona for their own reasons. And if I was a terrorist, I'd probably be annoyed at these guys because they're not really even part of that any of the movements, although we have to wait and see what more we can find out about what they've said in the past, what kind of information might be about their background and their history of what they've done and said in different ways, and
Right.
the remaining suspects, rights about it. I think he lost his power to speech.
Well, and so Greg, I was just going to ask you an interesting question. Like, I think I don't know exactly which Justice Department sort of came up with this, but I think the idea is that they're going to be charged with using like weapons of mass destruction, and that sort of charge results potentially in the death penalty. I mean, do you agree with those charges and that potential result of it receiving a death penalty, or you think that that's the wrong sort of charge here?
Well, okay, that's another complicated one. This is where we go back to Mike Dukakis. Do I think people who blow up 170 innocent runners should be killed? And my gut feeling is they should be tortured and then killed. But I don't actually think that we should have a death penalty in this country. Let's say that you didn't care about the ethical or moral aspect of state-sponsored murder, not to put too much of a twist on it. The pragmatic reason that we're one of the few countries left that calls themselves civilized that actually kills their own citizens, and in a gas chamber or with lethal injection or by hanging or by shooting them. We're not going to be able to deal with basic ethical and moral issues like drones and war any better unless we are also cleaning up our own house and not having a death penalty in this country. We just shouldn't have it. It doesn't matter how much you think somebody should be put to death, and you might be totally right, and it might be really cool to murder someone who's done something horrible. Maybe we should even, be even great to have public hangings. We just shouldn't do it. And there's this a long range of reasons, and one of them is just to be part of the civilized nations of this world. We shouldn't be doing that because that's what most people have decided to not do anymore. I think this weapons of mass destruction thing is interesting and bizarre. It's an example of finding the worst words you can use, the most powerful terms you can use, because you're really mad and applying them. And this is what the Congress does when it makes 3 strikes you're outlaws and things like that. And it's just crazy. Those were not weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction are nuclear bombs and things where you can drop large amounts of chemical poisoning on an entire city. That's a weapon of mass destruction. The word mass being the important thing. A pressure cooker bomb is not a weapon of mass destruction. And it's at the same time, what they did was as bad as anything you can do, and they should absolutely be tried for whatever high level of crimes they should be tried for. Or him, I guess I should say, because one was dead. Also, just think about this as a citizen. Since we brought up the pressure cooker bombs, what's going to happen next time you want to buy a pressure cooker?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a 19-year-old.
Hey, Greg, do you hear me?
Guy who I don't think so. I think you're going to avoid doing that. Just to underscore a little personal note there of just, pressure cookers are now off limits for people who are not privileged. Because someone's going to look at you funny, they're going to call the police, they're going to dial 911. I just saw a guy buying a pressure cooker at Target. It's not a weapon of mass destruction, it's a pressure cooker, it's a cooking implement. It was converted into a weapon of local destruction.
Right. Right. Kamal, do you hear me okay? Hey, Kamal, I see you, but I don't hear you. I don't hear your audio. Do you hear him?
I can hear Kamal.
You hear Kamal?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I hear you. Now I hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So we were just talking about whether or not we thought that what these guys use should be considered weapons of mass destruction and should be given the death penalty because of it. I mean, what's your take? You're from Pakistan, so what's your take on how maybe America handles this and how it will, sort of look like to the rest of the world, depending on how we handle the, the next steps that take place with this kid?
Yes, absolutely. The case of mass destruction over there, the weapon of mass destruction need to be in one law over there, or all. They should implement death penalty to those who are trying to reach or prevail weapon of mass destruction or something like that. So there is no debate on that. There should be one law over there all over the world. Either it's America, either it's Pakistan, either anywhere else over the world. That weapon of mass destructions are not to be leaked out very easily all around the world or something like that. It cannot be reached to the terrorists over there.
Right. Do you think, Greg, that there's going to be do you think that the world's going to be sort of anticipating how we handle, these guys, how we handle these guys, and are like going to be on their toes, waiting to see what we do with them? Or do you think, like, to people of Al Qaeda, like this, because these guys weren't affiliated with them, they don't even like care at all? I mean,
well, a good question. As Kamal has pointed out, this thing that happened in Boston is the kind of thing that happens in Pakistan week after week or month after month, and in many other countries as well. And I think that we're lucky that other people, other countries, look to us and say, "We're sorry this happened to you." Instead, they could be saying, "Yeah, this happens to us all the time. Why are you whining about it?" Okay, but people are actually being very helpful and nice. And when 9/11 happened, the rest of the world came to our aid sort of emotionally and said, "We're sorry this happened to you." And now they're saying, "We're sorry this happened to you." But really, this doesn't happen here very often. Then there are other places where it happens all the time. And I think that that fact means that people are going to be distracted by their own little explosions going on in their cities and towns. And I don't think people are going to be watching us that closely. I think it's a little. How interesting to the rest of the world? I'd like to know what Kamal thinks about this. How interesting is it to the rest of the world that we're divided on whether this is a crime in which we put someone in military court versus civil court? And I'm thinking not much, because that's actually an esoteric feature of American law and not necessarily universal. I don't know if it is or not. But how interesting is the splitting hairs as to whether he should be tried in military court versus civil court or criminal court, I should say, to anyone else in the world.
Great. Let me explain to you. Here in Pakistan, we are having on May 11th an election 2013, and we are running an election campaign all over Pakistan. And nowadays, what happens since last every day we are having a blast in different parts of Pakistan, especially in Karachi. Yesterday we have one where 11 innocent gave their life, more than 45 injured over there. Day before yesterday, there is another attack to the political party over there. So we are in middle of war. We are in middle of war where we are trying to help out our own self. We are trying to gather our nation under one platform there that we have to fight these terrorists. So we have to come up with a new world order where we can say that, okay, get lost to those terrorists who wanted to disturb the peace of the world. We need the peace of the world. It's a very small world where we can engage positively, where we can engage in our experiences, where we can engage in our expertise, where we can engage the people, where they can earn more about their culture, more about their technology, more about their influence over there. So we have to come up with something very the world which we unite in one platform.
Greg, feel free to respond to anything.
Well, no,
to anything
I think that he's right, and I think that we're lucky that people in Pakistan and people in other countries are paying attention to this and are saying that they're supportive of this event being a horrible event for us. But it is a little bit like somebody having a really bad cold complaining to somebody who has cancer. And that's probably a bad analogy, but it's roughly the idea that in Pakistan there are daily bombings, and right now because of the elections. In other parts of the world, this kind of thing. When was the last time we had a bombing in the United States?
Well, yeah,
I'm trying to remember.
It was. I mean, there was that. There was that guy on the airplane that had the bomb in his pants that almost, really caused some destruction a few years back.
The underwear bomber, and there was what people often forget, the famous smiley face bomber. There was a kid who was putting pipe bombs in people's mailboxes and to make a giant smiley face map in the upper Midwest and the Great Plains states. Just a crazy kid. And in fact, it's interesting that the actual number of bombs in this country that do exist every year that are disarmed by bomb squads is actually several thousand, which basically is a testament to the complete inadequacy of bomb makers in the United States, which are mostly deranged high school students, that they can't make bombs that actually go off. But the number of attacks that actually work, where something blows up and people are killed in this country, is these days extremely, extremely low. And it's that doesn't make it not horrible. The Boston thing was a horrible thing. It's as horrible as it can be to everybody involved. But the day before, the same day, and the day after, something roughly equivalent happened in Pakistan. 3 or 4 things happened every day somewhere else in the world that week, every single day that week. I think that I guess what I'm saying is the answer to your original question is we shouldn't really expect people elsewhere in the world to really even be that concerned about this. They've been helpful and have sent condolences, but then they're going to go back and deal with the bombing that happened since the last time. There's probably been a bombing somewhere since you asked that question a few minutes ago. By the way, there's been a new arrest in the Ryson case. One question we could ask is, why is it that these things come in little clusters? Why is April the month that all these weird things happen in the United States? And why is it that whenever there's a terrorist attack, somebody sent our local Wells Fargo just down the street from me here got powder sent to it in the mail, and they had to send all the employees home 2 days ago. Something about this time of year in the United States.
Kamal, do you have any follow up on some of the things that Greg's bringing up?
Yes, great. Yeah, great. First of all, we are not going to send you a condolence over there because we are feeling that it's happening in Pakistan. So we are part of that. We feel the humanity pain over there. We know how if somebody some loved one killed over there, how it feels. So we are part of that. So we feel that it's happening in our own home. Number 2, we have to find it out. What are the connector over there? How these elements provoke till the end of those that is bombing. We can find it out the chain over there. Last year 2012, we can find out the attack there in the Gurdwara over there in Milwaukee, where they are the killing of more than 10 people over there. Then there is a killing at the school over Colorado, where I think there are more than 20 students, kindergarten students killed over there. So there are segments happening different part of the states as well. So we have to find the connection in who are the elements are hidden by our enforcement agencies and prevailing their work all over state. So we have to find it out. Either they have connection with our own country over here. So we have to find it out and demolish those connection over there. We have to check it out our youth, why they are involving in these kind of activities, why they are a brighter future, what's the reason behind it.
What do we think do we have any thoughts on what we think the reason is, Kamal or Greg?
For us in Pakistan, we think For us in Pakistan, we think the education is the concern. Education is the reason behind it. Education, the literacy rate, and then the lack of job creation here in Pakistan. That's the reason. Two important reasons in Pakistan. In a state that they have the subject over there.
Yeah, I think that Kamal mentioned some of the other events, Sandy Hook and Colorado, that the movie theater shooting and all those things, and I think that those, and we could throw in the Gabby Gifford shooting in New Mexico, and several other things, and I think that those events are isolated from each other and not connected to each other as any kind of organizational thing. There's not someone or something behind them, but they may be connected to each other, and I would love to know more about why. We want to know why. A very common theme in those sorts of things, and which might have a very common theme with those things is to say this is mental illness. Okay, and to me that's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it may underscore our need to address mental illness issues in this country, which we do not address to the extent that we should. On the other hand, it also may divert attention away from other important causes as well. One of them being the simple fact that anybody who decides they want to get a bunch of bullets and guns and kill a lot of people can just easily do so because we have essentially unfettered gun ownership and distribution, and can have any kind of gun you want and all that stuff. I'm a strong proponent of changing that and making that less of a problem.
We'll have to get you on here, Greg, to speak about gun control then.
Oh yeah, we could definitely do that. The thing is that the other thing that is interesting to note in talking to Kamal here is very interesting because education is not the point, not the issue here with those events. Most of those killings were done by people who were in college or had finished high school, and by world standards we had a fair amount of education. In a sense, America has the privilege of having people killing mass numbers of individuals for reasons of mental illness rather than having it be a problem of education. That doesn't mean it's not education though, because there's still maybe things in our education system that we're doing where we're not helping people to grow up to be individuals that won't do this. It would be nice if we had a better way of having individuals grow up to not be mass murderers. On the third hand, if I may be allowed that, there's a lot of people in America. There's 300 million people here. If a tiny percentage of people are going to do this kind of thing, then this is going to happen now and then, and there may be almost nothing we can do about it. My question here is the Boston bombing like Sandy Hook? Is the Boston bombing like the Colorado movie theater shooting, or is it more like the 9/11 attack? Is it? I really am leaning more towards the former. I really think that even though there's a connection to the terrorism way, it's terroristic to go into a movie theater and shoot people, but it is not Al Qaeda. It is not organized international terrorism that killed people in Sandy Hook. And I'm not sure that the Boston bombing, despite things that may look like it connects it to terrorism of that kind, of politically motivated terrorism. I don't think these guys were particularly sophisticated politically or religiously or anything else, and I don't think there's any evidence of their connection to anyone else. I think they were just two crazy kids that might as well have walked into a movie theater during the screening of Iron Man 3 and shot a bunch of people, but instead they blew up a bunch of runners at the Boston Marathon. And I'm not convinced that I'm not convinced that we know what category to put them in. I'm not saying they're definitely one category. I'm not convinced we know what category of bad guy to put those two kids in.
Kamal, do you have anything you want to add?
No, absolutely. There is a mental sickness over there for those incident happened in last 2012, the shooting in the cinema and Milwaukee incident, and all of the killing incident happened by the gun. So these are the mental sickness over there, which is proclaimed after the investigation. But at the bombing over there, what we say means these acts should investigated where they get the element to create a bomb inside America over there, where how they reach to the gathering over there. So there are questions to be asked. What we think over here, we think we are working over here in Pakistan as well, that we are creating a youth force where we are condemning. We are going to the universities, we are to the colleges over there, we are going to the schools over there, and are getting youth on board and telling them, if somebody asks you to go on that particular direction where you see that religion is involved or something like that, then you have to disarm yourself and ask your guardian to help you out to find the better direction over there. So there are lots of elements who are giving the bright amount of money, very good future over there, but absolutely we have to find out the way how to condemn these things and how to limit these things under the law and order situation.
Greg, do you want to comment?
No, I basically agree, and I'm glad to see that kind of thing is being done. And I think for our own situation in the United States, things are evolving now. The debate is evolving because of the gun control debate, which is actually pretty connected to now what we're talking about, because we're talking about those other events that Kamal mentioned. Mental health, access to gun control, access to firearms and ammunition, the attitude we have in this country about these things. And I haven't noticed anyone on the chat group mentioning it, but so I'll mention it, because then everyone can get mad. I'm not blaming video games, but what people usually do, more for shootings than for these other events. I think that we want to see these things all evaluated better and find out how we can use things like an education. An education system is, in theory, a way to get at everybody with certain ideas and certain information. One thing we have in the United States is a revulsion against having our public education system be a way of promoting ideology. Although we actually do that a lot, we also are opposed to it. The question is something like "please do not become a terrorist" ideology, or is that just public health and just something normal you would ask people to do? And as far as I know, right now we have in this country, I live in a school district. My kids don't go to these schools; they go to public schools in other districts. It's a complicated story, but I live in a school district that the Center for Disease Control actually showed up at because the suicide rate was considered to be locally epidemic. And the suicide rate at this local school district, in Hennepin School District in the Twin Cities, was so high because not only was bullying very common, but it was actually being encouraged by faculty and staff. And